Good afternoon, everyone. Today is June 27th, and the time is 1 p.m. Has the front lobby been cleared? Yes. Thank you. We are here today for a school board briefing meeting. Welcome, everyone. Miss Board Member Patrika is going to be participating via Zoom. I believe she is on the line now, I was told. Also, real quick, before we go further, I'd like to introduce a special guest up here. Joining us is Ms. Tyla Rushing. She is a incoming senior at Gateway High School, where she currently holds a 3.45 GPA. During her time at Gateway, she has been academically involved as a dual-enrolled student at Florida Southwestern State College. At Gateway, she is currently involved in the following extracurricular activities: swim team, dance team, as well as the dance team captain, and track and field. In the future, Tyla wishes to become a registered nurse in hopes of obtaining her degree from the University of Southwest Florida. For her career goals, she has plans to become a travel nurse, assisting others to lead healthy lifestyles. This is Tyla's second year with the Support Our Students Summer Enrichment Program. The SOS program focuses on 3 major points, which are leadership development, personal finance and budgeting, as well as college and career readiness. Tyla is integrating the skills she has learned throughout her tenure in the program during her internship experience with the board office. Additionally, she exudes leadership traits both inside the program, within her school, and her community. Tyla is an exemplary student modeling the tenets that the SOS program has to offer. Please welcome Tyla. Thank you for joining us. Okay, next up, Mr. Superintendent, do you have any notes or changes for the agenda?
There are no notes or changes for this particular briefing, sir.
Thank you, sir. We have 5 items today. Per board protocol, each board member should strive for 4 minutes for initial comment, 2 for follow-up, with a total of 10 minutes during discussion. Thanks. Let's proceed to item number 1, construction change order with Director Rickenbacker. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, board members. Dr. Benier, Esquire Dupuy Bruno. This is Scott Rickenbacker, Director of Construction. This is your change order report as required by statute for April of 2023 and May of 2023. On the first page, you'll know that on this month, we did $371,025 in change order work. Tax savings on those direct material purchases equated to $21,025 returned back to the district. And we had $1,552.27 in contingency adjustments. If you go to the backup sheet, it gives an explanation of what these charges were in the change order report as reported for the month. Are there any questions on the April report?
Board members? Ms. Morgan?
The steel is, Mr. Chair, Ms. Morgan, the steel that we had purchased, the school district purchased for AAA, has been located at the Canal Street offices. I've responded in a couple of different times to the board different requests. It's perfectly fine. I think it's important to tell people where it is and why it's there. That steel is, while looking very different than when it came out of the steel factory, is still constructively sound. I mean, it can be utilized for projects. We've discussed the potential of a AAA at that same build, potentially as a replacement for Hector Caffaretta. It could be utilized there. Prior to that, its planned use, and could be, if we build something different for Hector Caffaretta, could still be utilized to help support our OTC towers that are put up on wood pilings. Those pilings eventually begin to rot, especially at their base where the air and the water interact right at ground level. There's also some discussion about utilizing that steel specifically in an upcoming project. There could be uses for it specifically at Riverdale. So while that steel is still here, the construction company, the construction division has been finding uses and will find uses. I've actually put a hold on it because we want to determine what we're doing with Hector Caffaretta's K8. So we're not using until such time as the P3 proposal, the public-private partnership bid that is out on the street, until that closes. That will determine the type of model we put up on that property at the Cape.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I thought maybe I had missed something, so thanks for the update. Appreciate it for both of you.
Any other board questions on the April report? Ms. Giovanelli?
Just To piggyback off of Ms. Morgan's question, at what point do you determine and designate when you're going to use the steel? How soon, out do they have? Does the contractor do that? How does that? What's the process?
Beginning, if we were to build a K-8 model based upon the AAA plans, then that steel would get utilized as soon as it was appropriate to begin to tie in, and I'll allow Scott to be more technical. So as you build tilt-up construction walls, that steel is responsible for then connecting those walls and beginning both the second floor and the roof structures. And again, we do not have all the steel. This was an initial order based upon backlog. If AAA does not go forward as the Hector Caffaretta replacement, if that particular design is not the design that we choose to go forward with, then the construction division would begin to make determinations between the ROTC towers, Riverdale, and other applications for that steel to be utilized so the district would recoup its investment and save money on projects. Scott, do you have any additional information?
That is correct. That a lot of the steel is already programmed in for the Riverdale rebuild right now, but as the superintendent has suggested, depending on what happens with the Hector Caffaretta proposal, that could change things. We also looked into the ROTC tower, so we have plans of embedding that steel in all of our projects till it's gone. And the structural integrity is there. It has surface scale, which is no different than a wheel sitting in your backyard, which will be cleaned, powered off, and then they'll be cut to the appropriate size wherever we use them for the intended purpose.
Anything else before we move on to May? Okay, proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. That is for the April report. Next up is, if I can find it, change order May. Next up is for May. And in May, this month's reporting, we had change orders in the amount of $2,704,525.93, direct material purchase orders, which returned $155,019.21 back to the district as tax savings. Non-direct material change orders we had in the amount of $16,366.29, and the amount that's project savings was returned to the district of $16,366.29. We had contingency adjustments in the amount of $57,532.36. And on the second sheet, you can see how that formulated out. Are there any questions?
Board, comments, questions on the May report?
And what you can see, the main DMPs that are occurring are Franklin Parks Elementary buying and Riverdale High School buys. And then the deduction for the general requirements, that's where we got a return because the insurance costs for that project were less, and they returned it back to the project immediately.
Okay. Seeing none. Okay. Thank you for your report. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to item number 2 will be job descriptions with Mr. Dodig.
As Mr. Dodig makes his way to his particular location, from time to time there's the need to address job descriptions, bring forward to you. I always love the keen eye that you put on these. Mr. Dodig is prepared to present. I believe there are 4 in total today. Sure. And Mr. Dodig, appreciate your attention to these matters.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board. Dr. Bernier, Mr. Pugh-Bruno. We have 3 amended or modified job descriptions today. One is Coordinator of Psych Services. One is Coordinator of Mental Health Services. One is Coordinator of School Counseling Services. And then there is a new job description for Broadcast Communications Engineer. So I am here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dodig. Board member comments or questions? Ms. Morgan.
And I apologize for not commenting away from the table about this, because I should have coordinated school counseling. We still have Lean Six Sigma on the...
Correct, I saw that. That will be removed, yes. No, it's not. I saw it there.
Anyone else? Okay, I have no questions myself. Thank you, Mr. Dodig.
Okay, and these will come before the board for approval at the the meeting in July. There's only one meeting in July.
Okay,
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up will be our strategic plan refresh, and that will be with Dr. De Leon and I believe Dr. Savage.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, to just we are at the point in the discussion of the refresh of the strategic plan where we're bringing forward the thinking that you provided in your 2 retreats, as well as the public input that you asked us to gather from specific committees. This is an opportunity for us to thinking back to the house that Dr. De Leon shared with us, the roof and then the pillars, and we worked your way through sort of what the expectations are. They have written some objectives around those expectations, and depending on your board conversation today, that will drive the work in July for us to get more specific as to how we're going to meet those indicators. So this is an opportunity to go back a little bit through the process, making sure that we've captured your thoughts and your thinking, and then get some additional direction to the superintendent so I may continue the work and bring you back in early August a refreshed strategic plan with very measurable outcomes. So looking forward to the discussion today to see if we've captured your thinking most appropriately.
Thank you, Dr. Bernier. Good afternoon, chairpersons, Vice Chair Fisher, the board, Dr. Bernier. It's good to be back with you. I appreciate it. Today, I'd like to walk you through, as Dr. Bernier said, the updates to the refresh plan and the progress that we've made to date. And to do that, I'd like to first just recap the purpose for why the refresh and what led to the refresh process. What was the process that we collaborated on together, in collaboration as well with different community members and staff, and picking up on data from students as well. Characterize what that looked like and what data specifically we used to inform this refresh process. Share an update on what exactly the new content looks like, and also how we were able to maintain and continue to use some of the contents of the existing plan. And then finally, walk through some next steps, as Dr. Bernier was mentioning. So first, let's just take a look at the purpose, what caused and animated this refresh process, and what the process itself looked like. So back in March, I was sitting right here, and I know we talked about how the district endured COVID-19, Hurricane Ian. There was changes in leadership as well, with new board members joining, and of course Dr. Bernier joining the district, and also that the existing strategic plan ran through 2030. And so the ask was, how can we make the plan more focused and both shorter and the shorter and longer term, and also more focused in terms of what objectives and outcomes the district was hoping to achieve together. And so I hope that what we're walking through today reflects these aspirations. More specifically, the asks for my team and I at Education Elements was to engage the board and engage the superintendent to look at inputs from different community members and staff and use that to shape and make decisions around the mission, vision, and values that represent the aspirations and beliefs of the community, and also refresh the strategic plan priority areas and objectives, which I believe we did. And finally, my team's providing some guidance to support the implementation of the plan. And just to recap, I know you've all seen this house visual. What exactly we focused on is everything in that yellowish orange box, so from objectives up. So we spent time calibrating on the mission, why we exist, and the vision, where we're going, the values, right, the guiding beliefs that drive and guide the work, the broader priority areas, as well as the specific objectives. And if you recall as well, we took time to define what might success look like for each of these objectives and in each of these priority areas. And part of how we approach this work is to really think about not just what we were trying to produce and the deliverables we were trying to build, but the way that we went about doing that, right? And so really emphasizing the how of this process, and specifically how in terms of being collaborative, making sure we're picking up on different inputs, and from different community members and stakeholders and data to inform the shaping of the refresh. And to do that work, from March until today, we followed this roadmap. So it began with our kickoff meeting back in March. It found my team and I leading and conducting a number of interviews alongside Dr. Savage as well, of cabinet members, of directors, of each of the board members, and Dr. Bernier. We also gathered other performance data from across the district, from student performance to HR-related data, graduation data, and we brought all of that into board retreat number 1 and 2. That helped to shape and guide discussions around mission, vision, and values, as well as the priorities and objectives. And for the last month plus, my team and I have been collaborating with Dr. Savage, and Dr. Savage has been a conduit to us, to the cabinet as well, to get feedback on and shape the priority areas and objectives, and we want to show those to you today. What I'd like to call out, though, before we move on, is that this refresh process is really just the beginning of launching and successfully implementing the plan. And the other thing I'd like to call out is that it also represents an opportunity to continue to engage staff and students and community members, not just in the creation or the refresh of the plan itself, but in helping to make the implementation successful and adapting how you go about being successful along the way. And I'll get into what that can look like a bit more as we continue. So let's talk about how community feedback was picked up on and how different data was used to inform the refresh. So we used a mixed number of methods to gather data and input and understand community needs and aspirations. A lot of that came from surveys. We know that this process coincided with the accreditation process, so there were tens of thousands of survey responses from the Advanced Ed survey that we were able to leverage. That was also coupled with one-on-one interviews, like I mentioned earlier, focus groups that happened through DAC, for example, and then feedback between retreats 1 and 2. So we actually took the time and were able to get feedback through surveys and through live facilitation to get input before we gathered again at retreat number 2, just to validate our thinking and make sure it was representative of what people need and were asking for. Just look at the numbers and a breakdown of what that input looked like. So I know that we looked at summary level data from student responses in the first retreat. We also drilled down a bit more to some specific questions, if you recall, in the second retreat, particularly from students, from secondary to elementary. We also considered family responses to the Advanced Ed surveys, as well as educator responses, of course. And then we were able to engage different committees like DAC, the SAC committee, EDAC, and CSI through surveys, and also DAC through a live session that we did. And as I mentioned again, we had the leadership interviews where we had one-on-one discussions. And what's happening right now is continuing to gather feedback on the updated priorities and objectives. And the reason why that's happening now is to really inform the initiatives and strategic actions to guide the implementation and to really bring this plan to life. So just a different way to represent what I just shared in a more visual sense. So if you remember back in that first retreat, we took the time to step back and I asked you, what do you want to be true for a student? And I asked each of you to think about a student. What do you want them to think, see, feel, and do? We also took time again to look at that survey data and really roll up our sleeves, ask questions, understand what the lived experience looked like for the people that were responding and what they're asking for in this plan. And by retreat number, we also did in retreat 1 some initial shaping of priorities. If you recall, we walked out of there with a lot of ideas, but not necessarily specifically designed priorities. And by retreat number 2, we were able to bring them into 7. And then from there, we started brainstorming objectives, right? And also different ways to measure and defining what success could look like. And then here you just see a snapshot really of how the DAC committee was engaged to validate some of that thinking coming out of retreat number 1. These are the priorities that we're thinking of. Here, help us understand what are some of the headwinds, right, and tailwinds that can help to bring these to life. What ideas do you have about objectives and initiatives that we might consider to bring into this plan? And again, and you'll hear me say this a few times, the refresh process was one way of engaging people, staff, students, and community on bringing this plan to life and defining what the end refresh plan looks like. But the years ahead represent a continued opportunity to do that, right? And to do that with a set cadence and facilitated structures based on data, which is being defined and has been defined and will continue to be refined. All right, so let's jump into the plan content itself. So 2 key documents I'd like to bring to your attention. On the left, you see the blueprint. So the blueprint is a longer form document. That's kind of the more exhaustive overview of the process that we followed, why we engaged in this process, the rationale from a data standpoint and a feedback standpoint of why each of the priorities has been selected. And then also what you'll see in there is specific items that were asked for by the board, right, on behalf of the constituents that you represent. So you'll notice that those will be highlighted in blue in that document. And then on the right-hand side is the one-pager, right? So that's more of a synthesized view of what all of the priority areas and objectives look like, right? So there's more work to be done, and that's underway to define the specific KPIs, which we'll get to that discussion in a few moments. But just know that this is meant to be a summary view of the plan that represents and synthesizes the work that we engaged in together. All right. So a closer look at that, and we'll look at each component of this, the mission, vision, mission, values, and the priorities and objectives, kind of one by one and piece by piece. But I just wanted to thank all of you and the communications team as well for helping and supporting bringing this to life and really capturing all the hard work and thinking into this one document to really narrow the focus of the work ahead. Okay, so from a vision standpoint, we really had a lot of discussion about this. We probably spent the better part of 2-3 hours leaning into vision. Ultimately, the decision was we don't need to change the vision. We think that to be a world-class school system represents, right, the vision of where the school district of Lee County wants to go and needs to go. That wasn't without its discussion, though, of course, right, in consideration of like how might we change it. But ultimately, the decision was to not make any changes. Similarly, with the mission, to ensure each student achieves his or her highest potential, also the decision was no changes need to be made. Again, that was tempered by quite a bit of conversation and discussion and considering whether or not it might need to be changed. And that happened through some of these questions, like the strengths of it and who's the mission for, right? And what strengths does it represent? And again, with the values, if you recall, we did that activity where we thought about and you reflected on how close or far are we to living these values. Much of our discussion focused on what does it look like to live these values on the day-to-day? How do these values manifest themselves in different roles, in different job functions or as a student, right? And how can we model them? I think most importantly, that was a huge takeaway that I had from our second retreat. But again, no changes needed to be made to those either. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll take a look at the 5 priority areas. You'll see on this and the next 5 slides after this, there's quite a bit of text on there because we want to be thorough in our thinking, but just know that this summary here, it's really just a summary. In the blueprint, you'll see a longer form version of why these priority areas were decided upon, and again, the rationale behind each of them. So the other thing that you'll see here on this slide is what were we able to maintain and what kind of connections were we able to make to the existing plan. Okay, so these 5 here, preparing all students for life after graduation, enhancing a safe learning and workplace environment, recruiting, developing, and retaining highly effective staff, strengthening student, family, and community partnerships, and improving internal operating systems. And again, what you'll see is that each of these in the blueprint, for sure, there's both some quantitative data behind them and also some different inputs from different stakeholders to rationalize why these were selected. Okay, The other thing I would call out too is by retreat number 2, we had a list of 7, right? And then we were able to condense it, not necessarily remove anything, maintain the intention of all the 7 that originally were proposed, and then by reflection, getting more feedback, and just the charge to be as focused as we could, right, and efficient as we can with this plan, we were able to get them down to 5. So what you'll see here is the objectives and the rationale underneath that for each of these. And something that stood out to me on the rationale side was students' voices here and the extent to which students felt like lessons represented or were relevant to what they feel is relevant for their futures. I know we really sank into that discussion. We sunk our teeth into that discussion in the second retreat specifically. And I know the board really made an effort to consider, how do we get past that, and how do we listen to student voices and make learning more relevant alongside of them, right, and engage them in building what their future looks like and their school experience looks like. Moving on to the second priority area is enhancing a safe learning and workplace environment. We know that safety must be a top priority for the school district, and there's no compromise on that. That was definitely reflected across all of the interviews that my team and I did as well with each of the members of the cabinet and directors and each of you. That was across the board consistent. But this goes beyond safety and also getting at culture. And again, building on student voice, it's students having positive perceptions of their own classroom experience in that school culture as well. So I just wanted to take a minute and point out that with each of these priority areas and the objectives, the team really pushed in collaboration with Dr. Savage to be considerate of the different people that each of these priorities and objectives impacts or enhances their lives, hopefully. Moving on to recruiting, developing, and retaining highly effective staff. An emphasis on really making sure that recruitment of highly effective employees is top of mind, that there are considerations for the diversity and development of those employees, and that's across all different job functions, right? And increase retention of each of those people. We know that's very complex work, but we also know that stability, right, and having high-performing staff is how we work towards that vision. What I would say too here, that second bullet point in our rationale, absolutely a top priority, right behind safety. I heard that loud and clear, but particularly in conversations with the DAC group, this came out loud and clear, is bringing stability, having highly effective staff members in our schools. Okay, strengthening student, family, and community partnerships. And by partnerships here, we mean that broadly. I know that's a word that we talked about in different ways and consider different ways of thinking about what do we mean by partnerships. That could be community organizations, right, local industry, but it also means partnerships with students and understanding how can we engage them as partners in their education and improving the school district as a system. And that second bullet point there on the advanced ed surveys, again, that learning activities are somewhat, right, or not at all, students are engaged in like providing feedback on them, right? And so saying, hey, we do want students to feel like they can provide feedback. They are engaged as partners in designing their learning. Okay, and then finally, improving internal operating systems. So this is more looking inward at some of the systems, structures, and protocols that help to run the operations across different departments and divisions of the district. This need came about in different ways, right, and in different formats depending on which department we're talking about and what that looks like. But it was very clear in meeting with leadership that this should be a priority, and especially systems that help collaboration and the flow of information across different departments. All right, so I'd like to move on here to next steps. So how do we bring this to life, and what does the work look like in the next couple of weeks and months? Before I do that, I just want to point out what elements of the plan are static, or we'd recommend remain static, and what elements of the plan we would recommend expectation setting around them being dynamic. So the components like mission, vision, values, priority areas, and ultimately the objectives really should be static. A lot of careful thought was put into those. They're rationalized by data that each of you had time to look at, right? And based on input from many people across the district. However, the way that you reach those objectives and what those strategic actions look like, of course, are dynamic, right? So that's going to be informed by monitoring the data, looking at the KPIs, continuing to get feedback. Why isn't this program working out well in this particular school or across these schools? How do we make this better, right? So those pieces are more dynamic. So what you're looking at here is really a way to think about and characterize different years of implementing the plan. This is not, of course, not an exhaustive or detailed look here, and I know that there's some overlap, but essentially it kind of helps as a team, right, and as a board, and as a district to say, like, okay, in year one, we're continuing to align, and we're going to launch the plan, right? We want to be clear on what we're maintaining and what we're adapting, and this refresh was a huge part of that. By year two, you're really acclimating, right? So there's theories behind all the initiatives and programs, and you're getting more granular, and you're seeing either continued success in some of those initiatives, right, or systems that you're maintaining, or some newer ones, right? But some of the brand new programs, initiatives, or efforts, you might just be putting into place in the beginning of year two. But by year three, you really should be starting to see success or indicators of success across the board. So what I mean across all priority areas and objectives, ideally. And by year four, it's sustaining that before you're really coming back to, okay, we know that conditions have continued to change, so what is the future going to look like? So then by that point, you're planning for your next strategic plan. And getting more detailed and thinking about what the specific actions look like from now through mid-August, and then August through September, and forgive me, that should say May 24, but through the end of next school year. It's really getting granular about the specific data sources that will be used for each KPI. So what is the data source and what's the formula going to be used to monitor progress toward a specific KPI, and then rolling that up to the objectives, of course. Determining what the baseline is and the growth metrics are for each of the growth targets are for each of those KPIs, and then communicating the refresh plan and the implications to schools and staff. So given what we're trying to achieve, this is what it means for you. What do you need from us, right? By August, it's supporting principals in connecting the strategic plan with their school improvement plans and making sense of that so that there's coherence for principals. Moving down in the second column is really being crystal clear on the timeline and I would say cadence really of how often is plan monitoring happen. By that point, you should already know what metrics and formulas are being used to determine or to perform that monitoring. And that would also enable you to build and launch the scorecard, right, to support that monitoring, and then communicate the plan more broadly to the larger community. And then finally, around October, it's full launch mode, right, and engaging the systems that you've put in place to monitor the plan. And then that gives you the opportunity as well to continue to engage staff and community at some set cadences to monitor it and to engage them as problem solvers, right, and idea generators to help continue to bring the plan to life. So that, of course, will require like executing the scheduled status and progress updates, of course, for the board and the community, and then communicating any shifts as a result of looking at that data. And shifts might also include policy changes that are going to impact the district and how you approach implementing the plan. Finally, and just to give you a visual of how you might think about the cadence of monitoring the plan, is thinking about 3 levels of roadmap management here and the idea of cadences. So we know that, you know, at a tactical level, at the school site level, of course there's strategy to be considered for principals, absolutely, but school level folks and many different people across the district, their rate of refresh is rapid, right? And so things are changing very, very quickly. At perhaps like a director or coordinator level, checking in monthly on the objectives that a director is responsible for versus at the cabinet and the chiefs level. Of course, they're going to be supporting those that they work with very frequently and often, but really holding sacred time and space to check in quarterly or at the cadence that's set by the board and superintendent and cabinet to take a step back, look at the data, and think about what changes do we need to make, how are we doing and how are we performing towards our growth targets and fulfilling our promises as written in the plan. So with that, Dr. Bernier, I turn it back to you, sir.
I don't believe, board members, that I have anything really to add to that presentation, but I am very interested in hearing more about your discussion, whether we captured your thinking appropriately, and then providing, if the chair will allow at the very end, sort of, I'll ask Ken at that point to go back to a particular slide so we can talk a little bit more about what the actions of this staff will need to be moving forward to have you in a great position and our schools in a great position for this coming fall.
Thank you. Okay, board member comments, questions, discussion? Mr. Persons?
Yes, sir.
Are they in any kind of order for priority, or are they all equal? That was my only question.
Mr. Persons, I would share with you that there's no order. All of these objectives, especially since we narrowed some of them, all of them are of vital importance and all will be measured. Again, as we think about how we monitor, this will devise the monitoring plan that so many board members have asked, so that strategically, quarterly during the year, we are updating the board on each of these objectives, how we're moving towards them, and then giving a final report on an annual basis as to how we did. So there's no particular order of those objectives, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, and I would point out that those having responsibility for each of these objectives may differ. So they operate simultaneously with different people responsible for and accountable to those objectives. Thank you. Yeah.
Others, comments, questions? Okay. I think for the most part that it captured what we went through with those discussions. I definitely appreciate going through those meetings and the retreats. I think we're able to get a lot of things out there. And one of the other ones, a couple of things captured, like one that I liked that we had talked about was letting highly effective teachers teach. I think that was a very important one that we addressed. Identifying future leaders within the pipeline within our district. I think that was another important one that was captured and appreciated. So for me, I am good with this. I mean, again, I think we have a very good playbook here. My biggest thing going forward, we continue implementing, making sure we're running the offense, so-called. That's my biggest thing going forward with this, but I think it's captured a lot of that. Ms. Morgan?
Sorry, I should have gone on with my comments the last time. I think two reasons that previous efforts to do strategic planning in this district failed was that, one, we didn't have a scorecard, so we couldn't see where we were at any point in time. We weren't transparent about where we were and what we were trying to accomplish. But even more important, we never had a cadence. We never had a point in time at which we and staff knew that we were going to review these things. And so, yes, you've done a great job sort of refreshing it, but I think the critical pieces for us going forward that will make a real difference for this board will be the scorecard and the cadence. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Persons?
I just want to thank y'all. We've come a long way from little stick-em notes on the poster to put it all together like this and get our sometimes incoherent thoughts into coherent thoughts. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mike, always sorry. One of these days. Mr. Superintendent, what do you need from us next? I know you wanted to go to a slide. So.
I don't think I need to go anything next, but before we leave this particular slide, and Ken, I'll ask you to go to 22 in a minute. The objectives that we're just looking at currently to increase student voice, to increase percentage of families, to increase the number of engaged community partners, those are very large and very broad right now, and we're going to need to narrow those down specifically. So Ken, if you could go back to 22, I believe that's the next step slide. Slide just before we closed out.
Keep
A motion
30.
before we close out.
I'm sorry.
30.
Going
Right there.
This one?
30.
That's 30.
Back one up.
Two more.
31. Sorry, I must have been looking at a different slide number when I saw 31. I can read 31 plainly currently. So the next step for us is to take those large, broad objectives and begin to really identify the data sources. The formulas in some cases need to be developed. When you think about teacher retention, for instance, what does that really mean? And how are we going to define that? And how's that definition going to be memorialized so that if it's me or that if it's another chief human resource officer or somebody else, that organizationally the strategic plan continues to live and that new member of a team knows that this is the way we particularly measure. Once we have those, then we have to develop our baselines. We have to look at our student achievement scores. Those are the easy part of developing a baseline. The grad rate of 82.5 is clearly the baseline for moving forward. But in other cases, those have to be developed, and then we have to determine, and we'll bring back to you what we think the incremental growth would look like. For instance, I would not want to turn around and tell you that an 82.5% graduation rate could move to 95% in 2 years. We'll have two issues. One is we won't be telling the truth, and the second issue is if we accomplish that, we're going to have a lot of questions as to how we accomplish that, because there's some significant organizational work that has to be managed and worked on in order to get that work. I appreciate Board Member Morgan's comments. I think the other piece of where strategic plans can fail is when they're not communicated to the school-based level, and that the SIPs, that the school improvement plans are connected to these particular items. So in some of the details, you'll hear things about speak up, listen up culture. You'll hear requirements for things to be included in school improvement plans about retention and other things. And then school districts' SIP teams can get strategic about how in their building they can help impact something like a teacher retention rate or building a speak up, listen up culture. And then the huge part of this is truly the monitoring piece. You can call it a cadence. We can call it, just having a schedule of knowing when you're going to be updated and how we're moving on each particular issue within this plan, and then tell you what's working, what isn't working, what we need to change as we move through some of those other organizational changes. If you don't have to go back, Ken, but if you go back to that year 1 through 5 chart, as this becomes culturally embedded, then we have work to do as we get ready to do the next one. So excited about this opportunity. We had a long conversation about it in Cabinet on Monday. Very excited, but the team also looks at July as a chance to breathe. We will get some breather time in, sorry, did I say January? July. The team thinks of July as some time to breathe, and it is, but we're going to have some hard work to do in setting these baselines and then the measurable objectives, and we'll come back to you in late July, early August for that approval, and then we can go ahead with our Chief Strategy Officer and begin finalizing the plan, developing the public-facing scorecards, and letting our community know what it is that we want to accomplish and what we're going to do. And for me, in closing out, thank you for helping me to understand what a world-class school system is. It's so simple, that's why I missed it. When you think about being world-class, it is a standard of excellence. And that's what we're shooting for, whether we're fixing an air conditioner, whether we're teaching calculus, whether we are repairing or building a school building, we are always searching to have the very highest standard, and that is being a world-class organization. What we do, how we talk, how we behave, how we interact. So it seems so broad and nebulous, but when you really start talking about it, it really sets a wonderful, wonderful standard for the way this organization is supposed to operate. So I appreciate that feedback through this process as well. So thank you.
Anything else before we move on? Hand, Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I was just going to say I really appreciate this as well, but I want to make sure that we do continue the communication, because I think that is of the utmost importance, and the fact that we are consistent throughout, whatever level that may be within the schools, so that everybody does have a clear and concise understanding of what this is in order for us to get our measurements and everything. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anyone? again, sorry. Thank you, Dr. De Leon, to you and your team for doing this, and thank you, Dr. Savage, for, as I said, helping guide us in this. I appreciate it. Thank you. Ms. Patrica, do you have any comments or questions? I apologize if I haven't asked.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Next up will be item number 4, which will be fiscal year 24 preliminary budget, and that'll be, we will have our CFO, Dr. Desimores, and Director Lecter up there.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So excellent.
Good afternoon.
Hi there, good afternoon.
You're pulling up their presentation. Board members, this is the beginning of a signed budget that was signed by the governor 2 weeks ago, providing us a final indication of what the budget would actually be. Long before that, as the state legislature finishes its work, we get a preliminary idea of what our version of the budget will be. This is an opportunity for both Dr. Desimores, our CFO, and Kelly Letcher, our Director of Budget, Executive Director of Budget, to take some time to talk to you about a preliminary budget for fiscal year 23-24, known as fiscal year 24, and gather some additional input from you, and then we will begin the process of working towards finalization of the budget, which you as know by statute for the community has to be balanced. We cannot run a budget that is out of balance. And then additionally, at the same time, we will be closing up what we refer to as the actual budget for 22-23. So there's never a bad question when you want to ask a question about which budget are we talking about during this particular season, because we're really doing two things at once. We're clearing up 22-23 and at the same time setting out a preliminary budget or estimate for the 24 fiscal year. Dr. Desimore?
Good afternoon, Dr. Bernier, members of the board. Thank you so much. We're here, as Dr. Bernier so masterfully set up, to talk about that FY24 preliminary budget update. We do just want to point out that, yes, this is preliminary at this time. There is much ground to cover between now and July and September, when you will see us again for both the approval of the tentative and final budgets. We'll talk a little bit about what we have now, and then all the work there is to do still remaining before that time. And so just to refresh our memories and for the benefits of the public, when we talk about this budget information today, we are talking about 6 different funds within the budget. Our budget is made up of all different types of funding sources grouped into 6 major categories. First one being the general fund. That is our major source of funding for operations across the entire district. And then we also have the debt service fund and the capital fund. Those two kind of work in conjunction, congruently, both to cover the capital plan of our district, or that is the maintenance and the building of our new schools across the district and the maintenance of our existing facilities, as well as the plan to service our debt across the district, or in other words, to pay the district's mortgage on those buildings we borrowed to build. And then the last 3 funds would be the special revenue fund, and that is mostly made up of federal grants. So those sources that we get from the federal government in order to service specific purposes across the school district. Those grants we apply for and we get for very specific purposes and can be used only in those areas. Our internal service fund, which is doesn't have a funding source of its own. Those are funds that are transferred specifically from the general fund, but that is to specifically and separately account for the insurance costs costs of the district, both major medical type insurance and also property and casualty insurance as well. So you will see that separated in its own fund. And then last but certainly not least, our food service fund, which is specifically set up to monitor all revenues and expenses dealing with the feeding of our children across the district every day. It is and must be its own self-sustaining fund and must be able to cover all of its expenses through the revenue that it receives through the federal food service program.
So to kind of feed on that, and let me make sure the microphone's here. Currently, we're looking at a budget of about $2.4 million of all of those funds put together, with the general fund, of course, being the biggest part of that. As you go through this, you can see it. She spoke about the debt service and the internal service fund, while they are separate, are basically just transfers from other funding sources, so it's not new revenue that comes into the district. It's really accounted for twice in the budget. These are very preliminary numbers. They will change before the tentative and the final budgets, and then they'll continue to change as the student counts are done and information is done, but this is a very preliminary number right now. Breaking it down a little bit, and I'm going to refer you to the backup that was provided. There was a sheet called the funding analysis, and basically that's breaking out the Florida Education Finance Program, or the FEFP. On the FEFP, we had a total increase of $928 million, and as you go down, you can see that under the total funding piece, you'll see that is the increase that we are going to see this year. That is made up of multiple things. First, it starts with the unweighted FTE students. We are going to see an increase of 4,389.86 unweighted FTE over the previous year. I want to point out that of that, the state came in and increased our allocation above what we had already projected. So we projected an increase of over 3,000 ourselves, and they came back and projected over 1,000 more students strictly for the Family Empowerment Scholarship and the growth that was going to be occurring in that program. Along with that, some other changes they made is the district cost differential, or the DCD, as you probably have heard it referred to before, has changed now into what they're calling is the comparable wage factor, or the CWF. Basically, the change in the title is because of the change in the way that they're calculating that. It used to be calculated based on the costs that are in the counties. It is now strictly looking at the wages in the counties instead. With that change, we're seeing a decrease of 0.0052, which will be about impact us of about $3.1 million. And last year, they did change the district cost differential calculation, if you remember, but they did a hold harmless to us for the difference of what that was going to cost us. That hold harmless has now gone away, which I think it was about $2 million. On your calculation sheet, you can see it was 2.2. And now we have the 3.1 on top of that. So that change in the way they're calculating has cost us over the last 2 years now. The base student allocation is an increase of $552.33. It's going from $4,587 to $5,139. While that's a great increase, I do want to point out that there was a little bit of movement that they've done in the FEFP this year. They took some of what we had considered categoricals in the past, those items that were separated and funded separately from the base student allocation, and they have put those dollars into the base student allocation by increasing that BSA number. You can see, if you look on the funding analysis sheet, I've highlighted those in orange so that you can see which ones they are. It is the teacher salary increase allocation, the reading instruction, the teacher classroom supply, and the instructional materials allocation. All of those have been moved up into the BSA. With that movement, however, the criteria or the requirements that went along with those have not changed. So for the teacher supply allocation, we are still, I'm sorry, I want to point out too, when you take all of those out for Lee County, our increase is actually $119.48 to the BSA from last year to this year when you take those items out per student.
Okay.
So when the teacher classroom supply allocation, the requirement this year is that we provide $300 to each of our teachers for them to purchase supplies for their classrooms. They also made a change. It was before we could pay that out in September, which allowed us to pick up more teachers as they come on during the summer. We could pick those up. The requirement now is that we have to pool the teachers that are with us as of July 1st, and that payment must be made to them by August 1st. So unfortunately, that means that our teachers that are coming on brand new will probably be missed in that calculation. The teacher's salary increase allocation was moved into the BSA as well. The requirement for the growth portion on this one is that 1.41% of the base student allocation amount, or the amount generated by the BCA and the now CWF, is to be used for the increase to the teachers. There's still a lot of questions around that the Department of Education is still trying to get clarification for us on. You can pull out, of course, we separate the charter school portion, and they do their proportionate share, so we would take that off of our piece for them. There's still question on the Family Empowerment Scholarship students because they also generate that calculation. So are we required then to pay our teachers based on that higher amount, or do we pull that out as well? And also exactly who now is in that eligible pool is still a question based on the changes that were in the statute. So we're still trying to figure all of that stuff out. The reading allocation was also moved to the base student allocation, and it still requires that a reading plan be put into place by the district, which I believe you approved at the last board meeting. So those are the items that were moved up. They still have those requirements, and of course instructional materials, I don't have to tell you, we still must buy instructional materials for the students. So I talked to you about the removal of the hold harmless to the DCD, so that was 2.2 million. There were some increases that we saw. There was an increase in the safe school allocation of 1.4 million, which really helps us. As you know, the district was putting in over $1 million of our other funding in order to do that. So that will help us to lower the amount we're putting in. We are increasing, though, the number of schools and SROs in our schools, so that will help us win that area. The mental health allocation went up $856,000. They come up with a new educational enrichment allocation. This was previously the SAI, or Supplemental Academic Instruction allocation. They put that in there, and they also added in there the turnaround school supplement that was provided before, so those items were combined. And Lee County saw actually a very large increase in this of 14.8 million, one of the biggest increases in the state. We had asked, was that a mistake? Why did we have such a big increase? And we were told that it was because they were trying to give a 2% increase in that area, and that's what it took for us to get to that. So that's why we saw such a large increase in that area. So we can definitely use that to help our schools out. There was a reduction in our class size reduction funds of 1.9 million. And interestingly enough, in this legislation, they did remove the penalty for not meeting class size, which is a really good thing for us. With the number of teachers that we're having trouble filling, not just in Lee County, but the whole state is filling it. This will really help us in that area. While they're removing the penalty, and they're not requiring us to provide waivers that we had to do before, we still must submit a plan of how we're planning on bringing ourselves back into compliance with class size, because it is still a law to have that in place. Another thing that was added into the Florida Education Finance Program was $9.9 million on an area called the State Funded Discretionary Supplement. That is provided strictly for the Family Empowerment Scholarship students. So if we don't see the students, we don't see that, and that money is just a flow through from us, and then they pull it back out to provide it to the families of the Family Empowerment Scholarship. So while it's showing as an increase, we are seeing no benefit from that. Some other things that they've done that are really going to help us, which are really good things. They removed a cap for what they've called, what we call a group 2. So that's any student who is not a basic student. So for an ESOL student, an ESE student, an exceptional student education student, career education student, those would get a different weight. They would put a cap on that. So you had so many students you could get up to. Once you were over that, you weren't funded beyond those students. So we lost funding. So in the current year, our cap, we were over our cap by 1,586 students. So that was quite a bit. They did a little bit of adjustments, and we were only funded for 770 of those students. So we lost funding on 815 FTE. That was about $3.8 million to Lee County. So that group 2 cap being lifted is really going to help us, which is really good. If we're educating the students, we need to be paid for those students. The other thing that they did was they increased the program weight for the career education students. So if we have students in our career education, which we're really pushing, and that's a good thing for our kids, it provides them some learning opportunities for those students who may not want to go to college but want to look for another field. It gives us a little higher weight than an average 9th through 12th grade student. So they had been averaging the same as the 9 through 12, even though those programs are more costly, and they have increased that above the 9.9 to 12. So 9 to 12 generates a 0.988, and the career education is generating a 1.072, which is really good for us.
So if I may add something here, just to take you back to the funding analysis here, which is a very detailed breakdown of the FEFP. We provide that because, as Kelly mentioned earlier, the FEFP is the major funding source within the operational funds. So pretty necessary to understand all the mechanisms that go in that, because it is a major driver of the budget that we have. All of this information related to the program weights and how they change from one year to the next is very directly related to how we fund schools, right? The money that each of our students or each of the FTE is generating, and therefore how we then can turn around and give it to each of the schools in order to provide the world-class education in each of our locations. And so those changes within all of the program weights, the changes within each of the parts and pieces of the FEFP become very important drivers as to what exactly happens in the budget, how does it happen, and why does it happen, because of these changes that are made inside of the FEFP. So very critical, very important. We know we provided a lot of detail there, but just wanted to give a few notes why. Because of that large amount of almost, over $900 million that is being provided through that funding mechanism, and how that breaks down and what impact it has as each of the changes that they make have to flow through the budget, and we have to do something to react to how all of that works.
Thank you, Amy. So of that, when you get to the bottom line of all of that, we are actually going to see about a $72.9 million increase over the previous year. 30 million of that is due to just the new students in the FTE. So 30 million is generated just strictly off of new students. There was the 10 million for the state-funded discretionary family empowerment. Remember, that's the 9.9 or 10 million that goes straight to them. And that leaves about 33 million for new initiatives and inflationary costs for the district.
So then what do we know as far as our challenges, specifically in the general fund, and what happens as we are analyzing that 72 or 70, almost $73 million increase and how that breaks down? And Kelly just told us that, all right, based on what we know that we have to do in terms of handling the growth of our new students and what specifically has to go out to FES or Florida Empowerment Scholarships, now we're talking about $33 million for new initiatives, inflationary costs. How will that break out? Well, these are the things that we know of at this point. So knowing that through the legislative actions, we have an increased retirement rate for each of our employees. That increased retirement rate from 11.9 to a little over 13.5% equates to about $8.3 million across the district. So we know we have to deal with that inflationary cost. We also do have increased health benefit costs for our employees. We know as we came the end of last year and then entering into this year, we had a new benefit structure for our employees. The cost of that being at about $19 million, as we had discussed last year. And then increased property insurance, given the circumstances of what our area in Florida just went through. We knew that we were going to have some increased property insurance numbers. At the time that we were putting this information together, it was estimated to be about $12 million, and I believe that there was a previous board meeting where the board had approved an expenditure up to not to exceed amount that reflected that $12 million increase. So those things together are at about $39 million, right? When we had just kind of said that we had about $33 million to deal with inflationary costs and new initiative, right? So just those things, knowing that there's so many more things here that we didn't necessarily talk about and I didn't necessarily mention, but that is the work that we have ongoing right now, is to determine how do we come into balance with the resources that we have, all of the things that we know that we need to do, those things, what are those things that are the highest priority so that we can present our balanced budget to the board. So that work continues, but this is just kind of a snapshot of some of the challenges as we work to balance our budget that we deal with, knowing what our known inflationary increases are at this time. So still much work to do, but we know that every year we will balance our budget, and we will do that with our priorities in mind. So let's talk about those a little bit when we talk about what it is that is the focus of the budget, and fitting that we come behind the strategic plan conversation, because as we build our budget, of course, that is where the focus must lie, is what has the board, our stakeholders laid out as the important priorities for any particular year, short and long term, in terms of a strategic plan. So we know that our primary focus is on resources to the classroom. That is the number one priority and the driver of how student achievement will move forward. So, and a focus on the whole child throughout the last few years, especially given all the things that that we as a world, as a state, as a county, we've been through related to COVID, related to storms, related to everything. We know that we must focus on a whole child and a whole person, a whole staff, if I might, in terms of mental wellness, our English learners, any additional interventions and supports that students may need that may go very much beyond academics, but of course work to support academics, and recapturing learning losses. And then a focus on employee retention, knowing that this is a very people-intensive business, so we need all of our people in order to accomplish all of the things that we need to accomplish within the strategic plan and within trying to capture our vision and our mission. So those are the things that we keep an eye on as we build our budget to determine how and when will we expend resources. So that was the general fund conversation. Just to give an overall or a high level on the rest of the funds, you got each of the preliminary numbers in one of the earlier slides as to how much is right now in each of the other funds. For our debt service, currently estimated at about $94.7 million. As I mentioned earlier, the debt service fund is not a funding source on its own. All of that money comes from a transfer from capital. So some of our capital funding sources, that is impact fees or potentially sales tax or potentially our property tax revenues in capital, transferred over to the debt service fund so that we may pay our debt service on our COPs, our certificates of participation, or that is, as I mentioned, the mortgage that the school district has on any of our buildings that we've built. So we continue to work on our debt service plan and our capital as well. So right now, currently estimated at $768.4 million. You see listed here the major funding sources within capital, both our property tax, or that is capital millage tax, sales taxes, and impact fees. Major sources of funds within there, within the capital fund. These are the estimates that we currently have of what we expect to receive in those revenue sources for next year. And we will, in the near future, bring you in a briefing or an update on the entire capital plan. That is, all of the funding sources for it over a 5-year window, right? All of the funding sources as estimated over 5 years, all of the expenses and projects as estimated over the next 5 years, and that will include a briefing and a picture of how debt looks over the next 5 years as well. How much to be expended on debt, where those funding sources are coming from, and what the percentages look like, or that is, how much are we spending in our debt service as it relates to our revenue being brought in, as well as what we are predicting or what we can expect our capital reserve to be at the end of those 5 years within the 5-year plan. And that will be coming to you within the near future.
And I just want to point out, too, another great thing that happened during this legislation was the state would postpone the cost per student station requirement until 2026. Gives us a little bit of a breathing room. As you know, every district struggled with being able to meet that mandate with the amounts that were set. So that was a very good thing that happened during the legislative session for us. I just wanted to make sure we pointed that out.
The food service fund, as we mentioned earlier, strictly to feed the students across the district, $70.4 million is our preliminary budget estimate for that. That does include the breakfast and lunch for all students across the district at no additional charge, because we continue to be a community eligibility program for all schools in the next year. So that program continues. And then last, our preliminary estimate right now for the internal service fund of $195.7 million. This is the fund, again, that accounts for all of the insurance costs of the district, both property and medical. So this is not its own funding source. These funds are transferred from other funds, general fund within the budget, in order to specifically account for the expenditures in that particular category.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the tax roll. So in FY23, our tax roll was set at $133 billion, which was to generate $96 million in discretionary dollars for us and $192 million in the capital outlay. I don't talk about the required local effort here because, as you know, that's part of the Florida Education Finance Program, and as our tax rolls increase or decrease, the state funding portion goes the opposite. So when our tax rolls increase, generates more required local effort, they decrease the amount of state funding that we receive in that same amount. So where we see increases or decreases in the tax roll is in our discretionary tax amount and our capital outlay millage. So these are the two I wanted to point out to you today. In the original conference report, they were the preliminary number was going from 133.9 to 137.9 million, which would generate 99 million from our discretionary and 198.7 million for capital. We have received since then a preliminary number from the property appraiser's office, and this is the one that they'll work with and send to the Department of Revenue. And they will, the Department of Education will now come up with our new required local effort based on that number. It will be tweaked. It may not be exactly this, but their preliminary number is 142.7 million, which will generate 102.5 in discretionary and 205.5 in capital outlay millage. So if that still holds by the time we get to our second calculation that we get in July, which the tentative budget is built off of, we could be looking at another 3.4 million in the general fund for the discretionary and another 6.8 million or 6.9 million about in the capital budget based on that new tax roll number.
And may I?
You may.
Just wanted to bring your attention to another handout that you have within the preliminary budget backup. At the top, it's entitled History of School District Millage. So you'll see the history of the property tax roll over the last 10, 12 years, since 2012. So right now, what's listed on there is what we have received at this point from the conference report, the 137 or 138 billion approximately, and you see the increase. That is a very modest 3% increase from where you see the increase to the tax roll has been over the past several years. So what that indicates to us is that we see potentially kind of a leveling out of that increase in property tax values. And so one of the things that we certainly have to consider as we put the capital plan together, 5-year capital plan, is over the next 5 years, what will that look like? Will it stay level? Will it come up? Or will we be seeing potentially some decline? So all of those are things that we are considering and that you will hear more about when we get deep into the capital plan with you all.
So as Amy was saying before, we still have a lot of work to be done. So we're going to continue to watch the student growth and the impact of that. We are getting students every day into our schools. They're in student enrollment and lining up out there, so we know they're coming. We have to make some final decisions on the priorities within the funding sources and get everything taken care of there. We need to make some decisions on compensation and benefits for our employees. We will be finalizing fund balances as the end of the year is coming up and we're getting the final numbers in and the final pays happening. We'll be able to finalize our fund balance numbers and have those in place. And the revenues and our expenses, of course, we're looking at all of those and making adjustments as we go, and the detailed capital and debt plan that will be coming to you. So the timeline that we're looking at for these things to occur, on July 19th is the deadline for the Commissioner of Education to set the required local effort and provide the second calculation to us. So we're talking, a couple weeks away, we're going to be at that point. On July 26th, we will be providing to you all of the documentation at that point for the tentative budget, which will include those updated numbers along with the final things that will be being recommended. On July 28th, we will be advertising the tentative budget in the news press, and then we'll have our tentative budget hearing on July 31st, and then we'll be having our final budget hearing on September 6th. There is a more detailed calendar on your backup if you want to look at it. There is a more detailed calendar of all of the pieces that put all it together and everything that's going to be happening. And I just want to point out too, in the last presentation that we had, there was a comment about Collier County's presentation and how it was very user-friendly, and so we've taken a look at that, and in our tentative and final budgets, we are going to be making some changes and adding some things in there so that it is a little bit easier for the general public to understand what is in the budget and the things that are in there. So we have taken a look at that, and we're going to be making those changes.
So, so for our discussion today, we rest our case and we send it over to the superintendent for his comments and, of course, board discussion.
Just first and foremost, thank you both to Ms. Letcher and Dr. Desamore for their effort related to understanding all of this. You know, we understand when legislation gets passed and we see things, we hear lots of great news, but then it takes two people and the staff that they represent to really dig through it, make some determinations. We have discussed the inflationary costs of our property insurance. Every homeowner in the state is being impacted by those costs, and as a large property owner, I guess, physical facilities owners, we're being impacted as well. Additionally, I will tell you that some of those costs related to healthcare are good things, because those are things you as a board in a prior year determined as part of the compensation package that you would not pass those costs onto the employees, because so often we give a raise and then they lose those raises within having to pay for insurance. So this allows us to continue to put that money, that significant amount of money for dependent care and other individuals who are insuring beyond themselves. It keeps that money in their pocket as spendable gas, grocery bill, rent, and other dollars. Are there still some challenges ahead to get to what we want to do with compensation? Yes, there are. But this team has not only focused on what they've listed, but they were very, very wonderful with me right at the very beginning. How we compensate our employees is at the priority level of our budget. You'll hear more about me from that this afternoon and probably again this evening. All employees, our support professionals, our administrators, our educators, our Schedule N people, those people are the backbone of our organization and deserve the very best we can provide to them. So I thank Amy and Kelly for that focus, not only in balancing the budget, but trying to find those dollars that we will come to you in executive session for approval to then open negotiations with our individual unions. That's the only thing I have to add. Look forward to your discussion and your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bernier. Board comments, questions, discussion? Ms. Morgan.
First question. Food service historically has run a positive balance, and we used it in the past to do a lot of the renovation, upgrade, maintenance of our facilities. How is that budget looking now, and are we maximizing the opportunity to use that money instead of operating money and capital money?
Thank you for the question. I believe we did maximize. So for all of the projects that we had where kitchens needed to be renovated, if it was something related to food service, we used the food service funding source in order to do it, right? So in the previously, that is, or at least over the near past, that is what has happened over the past 10 years or so. So we have utilized that funding source in order to do any renovation projects that a kitchen or a food-related item would need. We are, over the past couple of years, it's been a little bit more of a challenge. One of the things that we hadn't been able to do, especially this past year as much as we had before, was do some additional like a la carte sales, right? Because of the supply chain issues and the issues that we had kind of getting just the staples in, there wasn't as much a la carte sales as there typically would be, and that's a revenue raiser, right? That's a money driver in the food service budget. So we were missing some of that. And so we'll probably see, and this is my prediction, in the next couple of years, that for the renovation projects we might have, because certainly we did some, but we weren't done, right? We weren't done doing all of the renovations that we felt like we needed to do in kitchens. So we might need to taper off of that a little bit as the effects of not having that revenue kind of filter its way through the budget. But we are also very optimistic that we'll be able to increase the amount of the a la carte sales in the future, given our new food suppliers that we have coming on for this year. So we're optimistic that it will look different this year, and we'll be able to garner a little bit more revenue in those areas that we had lost previously, and then maybe we can see those renovation projects maybe come back on the upswing after a little point in time.
Okay.
So I hope I answered that question.
You did. That's great. Thank you. Question number 2. I was surprised by the tax roll numbers. And how is the revenue, are we getting revenue? I mean, where are we with respect to percentage of revenue projected for this budget, revenue dollars coming in, and then the tax roll for next year?
So we are still down in collections for the current year. In the general fund, we are down about 15 million still. 9 million of that we know to date. Well, I should say not exactly 9 million of that one. 3.4 million of that is because of abatements back to the taxpayers. And then we know in June, they've given us an estimate that, in June we'll have 3.4 more in abatements that'll take us to a total of 9.5 million in abatements, and they're still coming in, so we still are working on that. But we're down 15 right now. I'm hoping that taxpayers will continue to pay their taxes and kind of bring that back up. So, but we know about 9 million of that is from the abatements right now.
And the tax roll continues to go up despite the loss of property in this county.
That is what we have received to this point.
Wow.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes. Now we'll get the 19th, we'll get the certification of that. So at that point, that's going to be where the rubber really meets the road. What is it really? But to this point, this is the information that we have received.
Great. And then my last question is, you talk about learning loss as your focus going, one of the categories for classroom expenses going forward in the next year's budget. To what extent, how much longer will we be getting ESSER dollars associated with that? In other words, what are we expending in terms of learning loss out of our own budget versus what ESSER is providing us? And at what point does ESSER roll off and we have to pick that up? Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the ESSER dollars, this coming fiscal year 24, at this point is the last year of those dollars.
Okay.
So given no other information or given no change, then fiscal year 24 would be the last year for the ESSER dollars.
Got it. Thank you.
So all of those will be expended. So one of the challenges or one of the items that we know we have to reconcile is what happens and once those dollars go away. And there were millions of dollars there, so of course there's not necessarily, in case something major changes between now and next year, any way that the district will be able to absorb all of the initiatives that were going on within ESSER throughout these last 3 years. But we have this year and when I say this year, I mean FY24. I'm in FY24 already, so we'll have FY24 to kind of transition into what a new fiscal year 25 budget will look like. Many things in both budgets, right, in ESSER and in other budgets, whether it be other federal funds, Title I, Title II, or within the general fund that happen, that are related to learning loss, and that the schools and departments utilize in order to help mitigate that. So many different initiatives going on in all different types of funding source, but it is no doubt that our ESSER dollars were a major contributor to that over these past several years. And so there is a reconciliation of that has to take place over the next year and a half.
Thank you. And then my comment to the superintendent would be, as we lose these dollars, how are we measuring the effectiveness of the investment that we have made, both with, existing operating dollars and grants and the ESSER? I'm sorry, Debbie, did I take your question?
That was good.
You made that very...
That was good.
Anyway, I'm finished. Thank you very much.
To the board member's question, I will have to do more digging into that specifically. I was not here when the ESSER funds were allocated, nor was I a participant in how they would be measured. I have had multiple conversations, but before I respond officially, I'd like to gather some additional facts.
And I wasn't asking for an answer today, just thank you.
Okay. Mr. Persons.
I want to reserve that question for next year.
Ms. Patrica, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, sir. Directed to Dr. Desmores. First of all, thank you for putting the budget together in a way that is very easy to understand. I swear that each year you improve upon what you did the prior year. And in so doing this year, you answered some of my questions that I always have, but it led to new questions. So as I look at slide 5, I see a BSA of 552.33 is decreased to 119.48 after categoricals are factored in. And then I head to slide general fund challenges, slide 10. It appears to me that those general fund challenges have to be met with that 119 per student in the BSA increase. Is that an accurate statement?
Mostly, yes, it is an accurate statement because the increase to the FEFP is largely driven by the increase to the BSA, which after you filter out these other things is $119 per FTE. Now that being said, there are also other items within the FEFP that are outside of that BSA, right? So increases to, as Kelly mentioned, the old SAI, and I always have to look up the new thing that they're calling it, the student enrichment allocation. So that is an increase that is outside of just the actual BSA. And so that's why I said it's mostly true, but there are some other increases that factor in that are outside of the increase to the BSA.
Okay, so as I look at slide 10, is it fair to say that from a BSA perspective, meaning the money that the district gets to decide what they're going to do with, that increase that is not tied to any mandate by the state, we essentially are starting off in the hole. Is that correct?
Based on the information we have at this point, yes, that would be correct.
Okay, so I would love it if we could somehow, Dr. Bernier mentioned bargaining. We're going into bargaining in the hole, number one. Number two, last bargaining, I remember there being some concern by the board of not refurbishing, that's the wrong word, but you get the point, our reserves. How are we going to factor that in as a priority in this year's budget?
Well, I think the refurbishing of the reserves, we have to look at as a long game, not a short one. Right? So it's not necessary, it won't necessarily happen in one fiscal year, but it's a plan that needs to be kind of made and adhered to over a period of time, 3 or 4 years, in order to be able to potentially reach a certain mark. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we think about that objective. Look like Dr. Bernier, you might have wanted, no, okay.
And that makes sense to me, Dr. Desmores. I'd like to see whether we can have some incremental movement in that direction, and knowing that we can't predict what the revenue is going to be from the state next year or the year after, perhaps present us with some kind of a 3 to 5 year plan to get those reserves back up to where they needed to be. That's one thing and my very last comment is the RLE, right? Is that what it's called? No. The required local effort. Yes. Every year when we talk about the budget, I like to point out to the public, anybody who's listening, that the state sets the school district's RLE. We have no discretion. There's nothing we can do to either increase it or decrease it. Whereas every other municipal and county government in the state is given the discretion to increase it if they need to build new roads, for example, or they need to hire new people, or whatever it is that a county or a municipality might want to do, they can increase or decrease that RLE. We cannot. So I like to point that out to the public so that they understand just how I don't know, how handcuffed we are, I guess, in terms of the freedom we have with regard to the amount of revenue we bring in. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and understood. as far as your request for the kind of the 3 to 5 year plan of how that might look.
Comments, questions from others? Ms. Jordan, and then followed by Ms. Juvenelli.
Okay. First of all, I thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Morgan. That was like you were reading my mind. It was crazy, because I had written all that stuff down that you had mentioned, as well as some of Ms. Patrica. But also, when I was listening to you, so we're already in the negative of 6.5, right, million, is where we're at? Basically, that's what we're starting off, based on the funding analysis?
Yeah, based on the known inflationary increases at this point, yes.
Okay.
Now, there's many other things that will factor into that as we're building the budget, including, kind of where we end up at the end of this current year, right, with fund balance, how other existing expenses may be able to go away or be flexed out a little bit. So there's lots of things that have to be done, but on its face, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I had looked at that, especially when for the general funds, the focus was on resources to classroom, and to me, it's like, what does that look like? And of course, that's where the learning loss and everything else came into play, because ESSER is not even part of this. So where did those funds happen, which you already explained all that. But, and then also, we still do not know where the funds are going to go or how much we will lose when the empowerment, so that's still like,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, that is correct, and thank you for saying that. It's still an unknown, right? In other words, we have received an FEFP with some estimate there, and then and we've built those estimates into our budget as to how many students we're estimating. They are estimating for us will fall into the FES category, and then based on that, how much of the money basically is coming out of the budget to be allocated to them. I think what you're asking, well, is that's not a definite, it's not set. What they've estimated and what it ends up to be could be two completely different things.
Okay, thank you.
Did I answer the question?
Thank you very much for this, and I do agree with you with the food supply and everything too. The sales will start going up. I agree with that one too.
Yeah, good.
Ms. Juvenelli?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, because the questions have been wonderful. And I feel like the presentation, I don't know, either a light bulb went off in my head, but it was much more I was able to comprehend it, most of it. I'm like, okay, I understand this. So, and it kind of scared me. But I do have a question. So, and I think it was answered, but I just want to be real clear. So, because we talked about this in a couple meetings, the revenue loss because of the hurricane due to the tax revenue, and the abatements. So right now, we haven't had a loss, right? Is that correct on that?
So to date, we know of $9.5 million that has been returned to the taxpayers, yes. So to date, for our school district, is $9.5 million.
Right, but the revenue still is...
The revenue is still falling behind in the collection rate right now from where we expect it to be.
Okay, so that I wrote that down, but I want to make sure. So, all right, I think that really was my question. I just want clarity on that, because, what was the amount? What did we receive last year? Do you mind? From the revenue last year.
From the FEFP?
Yes, please.
We received $855 million.
Thank you.
And that was as of the fourth calculation.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, all right, so thank you. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Did you? Can I add?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think it's important for the public to understand that this is a preliminary budget. This is a lot like sitting down in your household and making some decisions and the best educated guesses you would have. I would caution all of us from a sky is falling attitude. It's not falling. The district is in good financial condition. We have dollars that are rolling over. We have planned operational efficiencies going into this year. Early estimates on the number of miles our buses will travel on the elementary routes is down by about 15,000 miles per day at 4 miles to a gallon of diesel fuel, which is what a bus gets, 4 miles to the gallon. Imagine what the cost savings could be, and that is a feeder from the general fund. So remember, our transportation costs come directly from the feeder, from that particular fund. So there are more late nights, more light bulbs that we're going to have to buy, and I'll do it personally. We're going to have to buy Amy and Kelly so that they can stay up late and continue to work those numbers from various locations, including talking from home on a lot of times late in the evening. We are going to be able to get there. We're going to be able to balance a budget, and we're going to be able to do some of the things that all of you as a board have asked me as a superintendent to prioritize moving forward. So to the public, you know, when you look at the very base aspect of this, yes, we had so much revenue coming in, we have these costs, and yes, right now we are not there, but we have full confidence, and I have full confidence in the two people sitting across from us, as well as their staff, who will pour over this information. And as we come into the fruition of July, we'll have a better outlook and a balance that you will have, and we can talk more about what we'll be able to do moving forward, not only for our students, because when we think about budget, we also think about our employees. So we'll be able to work with both. So I appreciate your time, your effort, all the work with staff, and getting us at least to this point with a preliminary budget picture. And I'm glad it's clear for everybody, because it's a little muddy for everyone. It's clearer there, and I'm so deeply respectful of the expertise sitting in the bullpen out there, and the hard work that they do each and every day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bernier. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciated it, appreciate the depth of it as well. A lot of the questions that were asked, I appreciate. I'm glad to hear about the information on the abatement, because that was going to be mine, so I appreciate that. So it was a good intro. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for putting this together, and I reserve my questions for the future. So
Thank you.
thanks. Next up is item number 5, Superintendent Interim Evaluation, and that will be Dr. Savage presenting.
So as Dr. Savage comes to the podium and switches out one PowerPoint presentation for another, I will share with you that this is around the time of year where we first are getting started with a recycling of the process to evaluate your superintendent. We were in a different spot last July. We certainly couldn't have done this in July of last year. I had only been here for a few short weeks. So this is a contractual obligation, but it's more than that. It's an opportunity for me between now and November, December, when the final evaluation is due, and I have a requirement to notify the chair in August of my annual evaluation. This is an opportunity for some additional feedback. The other piece that I'm finishing for all you right now is I have all the 360 information back, and I am finalizing a very brief short report to all of you that I'll place on your desks for your review regarding what I've learned from asking all of you, the community members, members of my team, about my leadership style, and with everything, there's always opportunities to get better. So this will be an opportunity for you, additionally, to look at the same way you've done interim evaluations for other members of your team, your auditing firm, as well as your attorney. This is the same opportunity, and I'll turn it over to Ken, who has a few short slides, and we'll open it up to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bernier, and good afternoon again, Board. Today's presentation, as Dr. Bernier mentioned, is just to kick off the superintendent's interim evaluation process for this year. This cycle is a little bit different, as Dr. Bernier explained, because he recently completed that first year, and so because it's a new cycle, this is really an overview of the year, of this next year, with the superintendent. Now, mostly, as Dr. Bernier referenced, it just follows the contract that was written. So because last year Dr. Bernier would not have had an interim evaluation because contractually he had a full evaluation essentially, and the major component of that was his entry plan evaluation. But this is important to look at because this annual cycle shows how it's intended to play out now and in the future. Bear in mind, though, if any aspect of this process doesn't work for you as a group, collectively both parties can mutually agree to adjust the terms. So just understand this is the way it is, but if you felt that there were some adjustments, that's something you could mutually work out together. As we kick off this new evaluation year, I just want to remind that the interim evaluation does not have any ratings in it. It's just an opportunity for you as a board to identify strengths and opportunities for the superintendent. This is consistent with the interim evaluation of the board attorney and the auditor's present annual evaluation, which utilizes the same format. So this is not the form where you will click on the number of ratings. That annual full evaluation occurs later in the fall, as you can see. The intention for that is that almost all the district results for the prior school year are in at that point, with the few exceptions. But let's examine some more specific milestones just for this interim evaluation. So these are those specific milestones so that you have all those upcoming deadlines on one page just for you to remember, especially knowing it's the summer and folks have travel planned and things of that nature as well. So you'll notice there is time, and this is not a very challenging process in terms of the evaluation itself. The instrument, this tool has been updated with new board member names as well as updated content of Dr. Bernier's annual evaluation. So there is alignment with the standards and indicators as you will see in his final annual evaluation. The intention is for you to provide him actionable feedback so that he can work to improve those areas or refine his existing strengths prior to the final annual evaluation. From a format standpoint, this is a PDF. So you can either complete this form electronically, completely if you want, including the signature, or you can print this form and handwrite the comments if you'd prefer to do that, or you can blend the two. You could type the form for the comments and so forth, which will automatically resize to fit into the PDF, and then you can manually sign. So those are all perfectly fine as long as it's readable so that Dr. Bernier can see what you've written and so forth. So it really is designed to be easy for you as a board member to use so that you can really complete the form in the way that feels most natural to you to provide that feedback. But again, the key is the content for the superintendent. Attached to this particular item, this in the format, you'll actually see the PDF documents. So you can see that. And this is not the first time you've seen them, but I just wanted to go over that one more time. At this point, I would defer first to any comments from the superintendent on this process before turning things back over to the board for discussion.
The only comments I have is I have built, tried to build and continue to build relationships with each one of you. All I'm looking for is actionable feedback. Please do not shy away from, and you won't, but please do not shy away from providing me opportunities to improve, giving me also some highlights from you, what you've liked about this, where we are currently and where we're going into the new year. And then I will provide you the information before the month ends with our my 360 information, and that may help you refine anything you want to place before that July 30th date appears. So again, it's more informal, open to this being a discussion on our one-on-ones or a phone call if that's what you choose. But if you want to do it privately and just send it to me, that will be also acceptable to me as well. But once I read it, I may have some questions, so we'll open the dialogue at that point. But this is a more informal process, and but I look forward to your feedback because it's a great opportunity to continue to learn and continue to grow. So thank you.
Board member comments, questions? Ms. Patrica, do you have any comments or questions in regard to this?
No, thank you.
Okay. Nothing from anyone? Okay. Thanks, Dr. Savage. Appreciate it. Next up on the agenda is C, public comment. Attorney DeBrie Bruno, could you address public comment, please?
We have no public comment for the briefing, Chair.
Okay, just to confirm, is there anyone in the audience that has not signed up for public comment that would like to make a comment? I do not see anyone, so seeing none, moving on to next, good of the order and board comment. I am going to first start with Attorney DeBrie Bruno that has an item for good of the order, if you wish to proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Florida Statute 194.015 requires the board to appoint a citizen to the Value Adjustment Board. The individual needs to 1, own a business within the school district, 2, said business must occupy commercial space located within the district, 3, not be a member or an employee of any taxing authority. 4, does not and will not represent property owners in any administrative or judicial review of property taxes. We have been accepting applications for approximately 1 month and received 4 applicants. The following individuals applied and meet the statutory requirements: Rishika Fuller, the owner of Career Clinic, Inc., Michael Barnes, the owner of MMB Food Services, doing business as Mildred's To Go and Catering, Dr. Shadrika McIntosh, the owner of Zaza Wellness Center Pharmacy, and Shane Spring, the owner of the Keys Company. Board members, the Value Adjustment Board is reorganizing and needs your appointed member this month. Thus, I would ask that you please provide me with the name of your appointee to bring forth this evening as a good cause item for your ultimate vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. So I'm going to ask my fellow board members, based on business type and such, which person and other abilities, which person do you think would be best to move forward for tonight if we have some suggestions? Mr. Persons.
Well, they're all good candidates. Of me, I think I'm going toward Mrs. McIntosh.
Thank you, Mr. Persons. I was also going to suggest Dr. McIntosh as well. I do think we have some very good candidates, and I hope whatever candidate doesn't get chosen would consider going on to applying for some of our other board opportunities. I know, for example, the Finance Committee is looking for people. So, other suggestions from members of the board? Do you have something, Ms. Jordan?
I know that I really worked hard to try to get the people to submit their names, and I agree with what what was stated, that they're all very, and any one of them would be good for this. So I just really appreciate it, and if not, go on to another committee.
Ms. Patrica, do you have any comments or suggestions of a person for this?
No, thank you. I'm confident in the suggestion that chairperson's made.
Okay. Board Attorney, do you have the direction you need for tonight?
So is there a consensus for the board to move Dr. Shadrika McIntosh forward as your appointee?
Yep.
Yes, okay, thank you. And I have one other question for the board. For the other 3 individuals, Ms. Fuller, Mr. Barnes, Mr. Spring, would you like me to contact them and advise them about the other opportunities for board advisory committees? I'll do so.
Yes.
Thank you, board.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Dupree-Bruno. Going back to good of the order and board comment, I'm actually going to first ask Ms. Rushing if she wants to make any comments. It's all right if you don't, as I said, but feel welcome.
Turn on. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Can everyone hear me? First, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see everyone's bright faces here this afternoon and ready to talk about school district stuff. I have no idea what's going on, but I am excited to be here, and I have learned a lot about the school, the district, and what you guys do behind everything. And I am lost at numbers and taxes. I don't know what's going on, but it's okay. I'm here. So thank you guys so much for this opportunity. I have had a great time listening to everything you guys have said, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rushing. I am going to start on the opposite end with Ms. Morgan.
Okay, so just compliments to communications and student assignment for coming up with QLIS, the district online appointment system and student enrollment, and also for their work with business services. ISOC has been talking for over a year about coming up with a presentation that can be shared by them with members of the community to inform them about what the sales tax is, where it's going, and provide a sort of a public forum with members of those committees. So that's terrific. I'm glad to see that we're taking in student interns from SOS. That's terrific. I want to thank the the Maintenance Department for their updates on the Bonita Springs elementary repairs. I want to ask Dr. Bernier, I know that I think the governor approved some initiative where they were going to have select 4 districts or 5 districts for year-round school as a pilot. I don't know what happened to that, and I know maybe 2 months ago when it first appeared, I suggested we would be an optimal district because we have rural agricultural, we have effectively, we have different pockets of communities with different populations. So I was just curious if that went through and if we had ever considered submitting, throwing our hat in the ring. Shall I move on?
More than happy to try to answer that question. I was not aware necessarily that the board was interested in that year-round process. I don't recall us having that conversation.
We didn't, but I brought it forward at some point.
Okay. I do not know what decision has been made. I will certainly get back with the Florida Department of Education and make some determinations. But with as much as we were dealing with and recovering from the hurricane and other things, I may have missed it. Ms. Morgan, I apologize.
No need to apologize, and it may be that it's more than we should be taking on it at this point in time. I had raised the question before, and I was just bringing it back again. The last thing I want to talk about is chairpersons brought forward a good of the order suggestion to the board, and Attorney Dupuy-Bruno and I went around and around about this morning, and finally I think figured out where exactly there may be a problem in understanding what's going on. So, and Ms. Patrica may want to weigh in, but the 2-year appointment for state and federal legislative advocacy is FSBA only. It has only been FSBA only. It has never been for the purposes of advocating for the district's agenda, only for the purpose of advocating for the state and the FSBA state and federal platform. Historically, there has been nobody on the board who is delegated to deal with the state delegation on the district's platform. That has always been entirely the board's responsibility. Individually, as we meet with members of the legislature, and then as a board, when we meet with the legislators, when our lobbyist makes arrangements for us to meet with them to go over the agenda. So there is no real need to split anything out because there never was buried into that 2-year legislative liaison any responsibility whatsoever for carrying the district's platform forward. Is that what we, is that what we sort of?
That's exactly what we discussed. And the confusion comes in how the committee is named on your committee list, because it says legislative liaison, then it says state, federal, and FSBA. I'm sorry, FSBA. So that's where the confusion lied. But
so I hope that clarifies what. And
Yeah.
if I'm preempting or misrepresenting, so.
No, it's since been made, I've been made aware of that.
Okay.
I will still be doing, and I'll send an email to y'all, an amendment to my motion. Okay, since it's not an official motion, preliminary, whatever. I just feel, we'll have more discussion on this later, that contacting the legislature and local officials is everybody's. You're right about that. But sometimes it's good to have a point person for either take the board to them. Just has a little more umph, I think. And it's just so important. We have to work with them, and we have to rely on them to give us so much funding that I think it's just a good idea. And we need to bring the whole board, I think, more often together and get asked, not just during the legislative season or whatever, and then have someone take that forward. I mean, I know we have our communications department, we have our everything, but knocking on those doors and talking to them, I know when I was up there, I just felt it did a lot of good, and I just think we should have a separate one. That will be sort of what my preliminary amended motion will be.
May I respond?
Go ahead, Ms. Morgan.
So may I make a suggestion? And again, Attorney Dupuy-Bruno and I talked about this. We did have in the past a form, and the form was what the motion would be. Because what's happened is that, again, in the past, somebody on the board made a motion. There was a lot of conversation about what the motion actually was, and then the board attorney didn't know what the motion was. The board didn't know what the motion was. We need to start with something. We had this form, and you put on the form what the motion is, and therefore we have something substantive. And I would just like to ask that we have something like that as the starting point for our conversation, please.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I just was under the misimpression of what it was, and then we had to do it, choose someone tonight for that. I was planning on bringing this up during the reorganization of all the committees at that time. And so I can either wait till then, or we could go ahead tonight. Okay, we'll go ahead tonight. I'll send it out to y'all. But that was, I was sort of pressured into doing it. We still got the 24 hours in advance. So
Okay.
That was all. And thank you for bringing up the history, because that's something that it was very confusing. Yes,
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to make sure that I have clear direction from the board. So we did have a motion form. Our policies require that motions be forwarded to the entire board within 24 hours, so everybody knows. So am I getting direction to go ahead from now on, use that motion form to make sure that it's provided to everyone? I just want to make sure I get clarity.
Board comments, questions?
And really is just a form where you put the motion, the name of the motion on it. And then we make sure that everybody has a copy of it. Okay with the board? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
Oh, and that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Okay.
That you had.
Ms. Langford Fleming, or did Ms. Jordan have a question?
I do have a question. Well, statement and a question. I know Mr. Dupuy-Bruno you're the one who created that motion, you created that sheet, so I know you have it somewhere. And then two, who pressured, when you just made the comment about you were pressured, I'm curious.
Oh, no, just
who pressured you?
The FSBA, they wanted to know, they sent an email to us.
Thank you.
It was not, it's not anyone on the board or the attorney or the superintendent.
Okay, because I was like, what does that mean? Okay, and again, like Ms. Morgan had said, it is the verbiage on there because it is advocacy, and then once you are on the advocacy, then they choose if you're going to sit on their state or federal. So thank you for the clarification.
I just want to note one thing, because I was confused as well, because on our legislative materials this session, it did indicate a legislative liaison when we went around to Tallahassee, so that's why I'm a little kind of confused on that. So, but I guess we can address that later on this evening then. So, back to Ms. Langford Fleming.
I don't really have anything other than all of the things put together today before the meeting. I really appreciate it. I'm sure Ms. Rushing appreciates it. And this is a learning curve for all of us, and every day we're up here, we learn something new. So sometimes we learn more than others, so keep an open mind and thoughts. The only thing that really crossed my mind was, and this is something for later discussions through the chair to the superintendent, I noticed in our slide, and I probably should have asked this earlier, it talked about the requirement for class size and that the state has had a hard time meeting that through many districts. Have there been any preliminary conversations? I know that this was a preliminary budget today, but it just kind of crossed my mind if you or the staff have had any discussions about how we are going to go about meeting that.
I've had multiple conversations, and I appreciate the question because I'd like to clarify. This school district is committed to meeting class size. It's a constitutional amendment, and I've shared with the entire staff that one of the things you do as an elected official or as an appointed school board member is you raise your right hand and obey the laws and the constitutions of this state and this great land. So we have a commitment to it. We are going to have to find better ways. So while the penalties may have been lifted, specifically the fining of the school districts, which we've not had to pay because of our school choice environment, because we are a choice district, we have to get to the point where our teachers are sitting on class sizes that are more appropriate. So as we look towards budget, those are things that we're going to have to do, but the critical component becomes finding all the teachers that we're going to need. And that's why we're working on that revamp of human resources. And I appreciate Mr. Dodig's leadership, and also really appreciate Hillary McLean, who was here for a couple of days last week, who will be joining us later in July for several months to help shepherd us through the search of a CHRO and finding that individual to help then continue to run that department as we move forward. So yes, this district is committed to class size, and I want our teachers to be in environments. As a former principal, whenever I walk into a room, I do two things. I count heads, and then I look at the diversity in the classroom, and then I try to make the determination or ask the principal or person I'm visiting with, what's the subject area? More so in secondary classrooms, that second question. So if I'm in an advanced math class, I want to see the diversity of our district represented in those classrooms. But the first thing I do is count the number of heads, and I look at the teacher to student ratio.
All right, thank you for clarification on that. I will reserve the rest of my comments for this evening. Thank you.
Mr. Persons.
Yep, I'll reserve mine until this evening.
Ms. Jordan.
I have none, thank you.
Ms. Patrica.
I just want to talk publicly about the tragedy experienced by our students and our former students and a current student who is a rising senior. I'm sure that I'm speaking for the board when I say that I find myself particularly bereft as I think about the impact that those children had. I mean, we're talking about kids that went to 4 of our high schools, and the people that they knew, and the teachers who knew them, and the administrators who knew them, and just the ripple effect of grief and difficulty being experienced by the community at large. My heart really, really breaks for those families. I don't think I could pray harder than I am right now for strength for them as they get through what I cannot fathom as being an unimaginably difficult time. And some in our own, some employees in our own Lee County family lost a son, and I just, like I said, my heart breaks for them. And I know I don't have to ask the question. I know that Dr. Bernier and his staff are on it and providing resources to those who need it. Those are my comments for today. Thank you.
Ms. Juvenelli.
I'll wait for this evening too as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank Ms. Rushing for joining us today. You have a very, very bright future ahead of you, and take in what you can. So thank you. I'm going to echo what Ms. Patrica said. My condolences go to the families for the loss of life with the teens. It's like you said, Ms. Patrica. It's unimaginable. It's terrible. It definitely hits home. So thank you for bringing that up as well. I'm going to reserve the rest of my comments for later tonight. Now moving on to Mr. Superintendent, if you have any comments.
I just want to add to Ms. Patrica's comment that the tragedy that occurred of our young adults is unimaginable. Yes, we have reached out to each individual principal individually, because when you lose a student, you lose part of your school family, whether they are a current student, postgraduate, or 2 years out. I also reached out to, in particular case, the former principal of one of the schools to make sure she was fully aware and that she had that information, because while you may leave a school building, you continue to your connection with it at all times. We have these phrases that once a something, you're always a something. And this is that particular case. Of growing concern to me, and what I expressed to the principals is harder in the summer, because and I use the word eyeball them. I can't eyeball them. If I had my students coming to my school, I would be able to see them, interact with them, talk with them, and we'd see it. So we've asked the principals to be hyper diligent as we move through this process with fellow students who are grieving as well as the families, that we help them and that we have the resources available to go out, make home visits, do what we need to do to help stabilize a student population that's dealing with the grief that, prior to the accident was unimaginable. I have other comments for this evening, but I think just for me, I want to make sure that the board knows that I will specifically address the administrative salary schedule at the board meeting and at the request of anyone. This is a cost-neutral proposition. The budgetary impact literally will be net zero because of a position we built a long time ago, way back when, before 3 board members were on the board. We split at the time and funded a split of our chief operations officer. We were going to have somebody in charge of operations and we were going to have someone in charge of construction and facilities. We still have those budgetary dollars. So the impact of this change with very targeted positions will be a cost-neutral issue, and I'll go over the dollars and the details with all of you at request or when you deem it appropriate for me to read it into the record. I want to be very clear. Support professionals, educators, administrators, and Schedule N will always go before any type of pay raise for executives. What I'm asking you to consider tonight with my recommendation of the change of the admin salary schedule is not and will never be a pay raise for all the executives. We are targeting very specific positions that you have asked me to raise the level of the quality of the candidate. One of those individuals is on the agenda tonight to be appointed, and if he's appointed, we have to have a salary discussion with that individual at a level that will attract him to finally accept the offer. Tentatively, he's accepted it based upon an offer, based upon this window in the salary schedule and a change to the window of the structure of the salary schedule. At no time will ever employee coming on board ever make more than your highest paid employee. And I know that's me, but I'm taking me off the list. What I'm saying is you have one other contractual employee, and that is our deputy superintendent. So at no time will any other person joining our organization exceed her salary. And I would just caution us tonight to be very careful, as you will have questions, and I'm prepared to answer them, that we be careful about negotiating salary in the public. That's the only thing I would ask to be very careful of. We want to get a COO. We want to get a Chief of Human Resources. You have me interviewing next week for the Government Relations and Communications position, and we have some ability to impact one of our employees related to retention and making sure that he stays here, who's a vital member of the team. So and again, the cost here is less than $80,000, and we've built a position for $175,000. We'll actually be returning money back to the budget. And I believe it's the right thing to do in order to get the level of employee. If you'd like to have that discussion now, I'm open to it, but I just wanted to make sure that before this briefing ended that the people who are concerned, number one, we are not offering a pay raise to all of our chiefs. I will not write a memo in the middle of the night asking you, Mr. Chair, and informing you of that. That's not the way I operate. And anybody saying anything like that is incongruent with the facts and incongruent with my behavior and the way I've operated for the last year. So, thank you.
Thank you for addressing that, Dr. Bernier. Our next meeting is our action meeting tonight at 6 o'clock. Seeing no other business to come before this board, this meeting is adjourned at 3:12 p.m. Thank you, everyone.